This video was brought to you by Brilliant. If you look at a list of every country in the world's economic growth over the last few years, it's not a pretty picture. Thanks to the pandemic, many countries, including the UK, have seen their GDP contract, and those that have grown are usually only a couple of percentage points above their pre-pandemic GDP. However, one country has seen its GDP nearly triple over the past 3 years, making it by far and away the fastest growing economy in the world. And that's the tiny South American country of Guyana. So in this video, we're going to be looking at why Guyana is growing so quickly. Hint, it's a lot to do with oil. Whether it can sustain this level of growth, and some of the geopolitical implications of this change. So, let's start by taking a look at the data. As we mentioned in the intro, global growth has had a rough few years. According to IMF data, in the last 3 years, so 2020, 2021, and 2022, the world economy has grown by a total of 6.1%, which means an annual growth of just under 2%, which is well below the historical average of about 3.5%. And the vast majority of countries are actually seeing far worse growth than they were pre-pandemic. However, one country has bucked the trend, and that's Guyana, which has apparently seen a GDP growth of 180% in the past 3 years. Yep, you heard that right, 180%. That's 150% higher and 8 times the growth of second place Ireland. And it also means that Guyana's GDP has nearly tripled in the past 3 years. For those of you who don't know, Guyana is a tiny country in the northeast of South America, sandwiched between Venezuela and Suriname. Currently, it has a population of about 800,000 people. Its capital is Georgetown, and it's a former British colony. In fact, it's the only English-speaking country in South America. Now, this number is so implausibly massive that you're probably expecting us to tell you here about how this tiny country is run by a crazy despot who just lies about its GDP figures. But no, Guyana really has experienced super rapid growth over the last few years. And just to be clear, their leaders aren't despots either. The country is actually relatively democratic. Anyway, so why is this growth figure so high? Well, the short answer that I teased up front is oil. Since 2015, tons of oil have been discovered off the coast of Guyana. And importantly, it's all within its exclusive economic zone. In fact, since 2015, a third of all newly discovered oil was found in Guyana. And the country now has estimated oil reserves of about 11 billion barrels. For context, that would mean that Guyana has the 17th largest reserves anywhere in the world. And fortunately for them, most of this oil is relatively cheap to access. And Guyana's production capacity is expected to be 1 million barrels per day by 2027, which would easily bring it into the top 20 oil producers in the world. On top of this, it's likely that Guyana will continue to find more oil given its current rate of discovery. Now, most of the initial oil discoveries were made by oil supermajor ExxonMobil in 2015, after about 7 years of searching. But having discovered a whole load of oil, Exxon and a couple of other oil supermajors, including Shell, Total, and Hess, have all invested heavily in Guyana. And because investment is a component of GDP, this has also pushed Guyana's sky high. And while this might sound like great news for this tiny South American country, oil doesn't guarantee prosperity. And in fact, there are basically 4 reasons that oil can be actually bad for a country's economy. Firstly, it can make you overly reliant on oil exports. And this isn't just because of oil's lucrative nature. It's also because international demand for oil can make your currency stronger, which makes your other exports less competitive. For example, demand for Guyanese dollars could increase if people want to buy Guyanese oil, which would make Guyana's other exports, like rice and sugar, less competitive, ultimately destroying their other industries and leaving them reliant on oil. Secondly, oil can make the state reliant on oil taxes, instead of taxes from the actual population. This means that politicians become less sensitive to the demands of people and more sensitive to the demands of their oil industry, which breeds corruption and poor governance. Thirdly, oil is a boom and bust business. So if your economy is overly reliant on oil, it will suffer from constant instability. Fourthly and finally, oil extraction usually requires foreign investment because small countries like Guyana don't generally have the local resources or expertise to engage in advanced offshore drilling. This means that they have to rely on foreign super majors like Exxon, and foreign super majors don't care all that much about Guyana's political or economic stability. This phenomenon, these four factors whereby the discovery of oil or some other lucrative resource actually ends up hurting a country's politics and economy, is known as the resource curse, or sometimes simply as the Dutch disease, in reference to a period in the 70s when the discovery of massive natural gas reserves in the Netherlands actually crippled the country's economy. But this resource curse isn't destiny. Some countries, like Norway, have avoided it. But it does happen to most oil-rich countries. So how can Guyana avoid this fate? Well, a state-owned oil company sorted quickly would probably be a good idea. Guyana has already set up a sovereign wealth fund akin to Norway's Norges Bank Investment Management, which is also a good sign. However, perhaps the main thing that Guyana needs to do is improve the quality of its politics. Since independence from the UK in 1966, Guyana has seen fierce political rivalry between two main ethnically based parties. The People's Progressive Party, which is primarily supported by Indo-Guyanese people, and the People's National Congress, supported primarily by the Afro-Guyanese people. Now, these two sides will need to cooperate if they're going to successfully manage Guyana's booming oil industry. If they can, then Guyana could become the wealthiest country in South America in just a few years. And if they can keep things steady, the IMF expects Guyana to grow by about 25% per year until 2027, which would take its GDP per capita to roughly $35,000, at least quadruple that of its neighbours, and roughly the same as Italy. So, if they play their cards right and they get the economics right, Guyana could have a bright future ahead. The problem is, there's a lot of pitfalls, and as always, the maths here is pretty complicated. And honestly, when doesn't maths get pretty complicated? If you want to improve that for yourself though, you should check out the courses over on Brilliant, because the world has never needed more smart thinkers. And Brilliant not only helps you brush up on the basics, but also leads you through university-level concepts like infinity, the history of maths, and the numbers behind neural networks. It's not just maths either. There's interactive courses on physics, computer science, and a whole variety of STEM topics. Plus, there's some incredibly fun content from your favorite YouTubers too, like Kurzgesagt and a brand new course from our Nebula friends over at Real Engineering. So finish off the year by bettering yourself with Brilliant, where you'll find thousands of incredible courses where you'll learn by doing, as well as discovering whole new ways of thinking. And better still, the first 200 people to sign up using our link in the description will get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support.